Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Life of Love. We're here today with a special guest, Jennifer Moore. She has spent most of her life in a realm of spirituality, art, creativity, and just higher vibration to heal and help us transform. She's an author, an empathic mentor, and master trainer for the emotional freeing technique. She's an international renowned trainer in that technique, which if you haven't looked into that, it's a really cool system to help work through any kind of things you're dealing with. And I highly recommend it. So just so happy to have you here, Michelle. Sorry. So happy to have you here, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Julie. It's so funny. Most of the time people call me Jessica. Like that's what they meant. That's what they say. I think this is one of the first times I've been Michelle.
Maybe it's Archangel.
Yeah, Michael. Actually, I'm very aligned with the Archangel Michael. So you must have been picking up.
Me too. So Michael's like, I'm here, ladies.
Here I am. I'm ready to talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know the way my brain works. Like for some reason, the names Stephanie and Rachel are like intersected for me, and so like it's not what something sounds like. It's the vibration of something as opposed to the sound. But anyway, I am so delighted to be here, Julie. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I would just love for you to just share a little bit with my audience about what's your driving force. And, I don't want you to have to say your whole life story, but like what clicked in you that you knew you're an empath and that you were on this road?
So the journey. And so first off, I just want to say that the coming to understand who I was and what I was a journey. It was a process. And the coming to understand how to address it was also a process and a journey. And I was, as a little kid, I didn't play well with the, they wouldn't let me play in the reindeer games. Like I didn't fit in. I was an outsider. I was different. Kids recognized me as different. And I was very sensitive. I was always sort of feeling anxious about like the world around me and everything. And the message that I got was that I was too sensitive, that I was overreacting, that I was taking things too personally, that I had too active imagination. I was also called a chatterbox all the time. And so I really internalized a lot of stuff that in hindsight, I think was really about picking up things that were going on in the world around me. Because before I go into like, how did I discover I was an empath? I'll just define the word for you, which is that for me, and this is a term, it's not a clinical word. It's not in the DSM-5. It is originally came from science fiction. And at this point in time, it's kind of a pop culture reference to a certain kind of person, or actually it could be an animal, a creature, anybody who is picking up the thoughts, the feelings, the energy, the sensations, and sometimes like the pain and the struggle that is coming from the world around us. We can also pick up the joy and the delight that is coming from the world around us. But the thing that makes an empath different than somebody who is just psychic or intuitive or just very open and receptive is that an empath processes the information that is coming to them as if it is their own. So where somebody who might be intuitive could walk into a room and be like, wow, it really feels like there's a lot of sadness in this room. The way that an empath would experience it is that they would go from being completely okay to walking into the room and going, why do I suddenly feel so sad? And what is challenging about this is that because we experience it as our own feelings and our own thoughts and our own sensations, we can think that the problem is inside of us, and that makes it really hard to let it go. And so for me as a kid, I was picking all these things up, but I was being told, you're the one who has to stop reacting so hard. You need to develop a tougher skin. You need to, like basically get it together, suck it up, buttercup, and sort this out. So that was sort of my background. And I would say for me, the bottom line driving force of everything I do is I know what it is like to struggle. I know what it is like to feel broken. I know what it is like to be gripped with terror and anxiety and fear and sadness and just all kinds of challenging emotions and not know what to do about it, and to just be and to think that it's all me. And I also know what it's like to feel relief. And so what really drives me is the ability to share tools that have made a huge difference in my life with other people so that they do not have to spend the decades of struggling that I did. And I also, I wrote the book Empathic Mastery, a 5-step system to go from emotional hot mess to thriving success. I wrote that as a love letter to my young hot mess self, as well as to all of the other people who have not been given the tools to deal with what it means to be highly sensitive and empathic, and who I just really, really want to spare as many people of the incredible distress and just the years of I don't know, like spinning my wheels and not being able to fulfill my purpose. I really want to help as many people as possible who are highly sensitive and empaths to not have to spend as much time stuck as I did.
That's beautiful. It's a hard thing when you're told you can't be who you are. And I think everyone can relate to that, even if you're an empath or not.
Yeah.
It's like this feeling that you shouldn't have, the judgment, you shouldn't have that, or not being recognized. And then, I could understand your heart could get very hardened because you're not allowed to let things in and out. You're told to just, like you said, suck it up, buttercup. And that's like a really, it's a really, like you said, it's a hot mess. It's a hard place to be. And I can relate.
Well, yeah. And I think that our culture is so, like, we curate ourselves so much, and there's so much social pressure to go along, to get along. And just even the bottom line of how often do we say yes when we really want to say no? How often are we going against our own better instincts because of the idea that we should want to do this, we should behave in a certain way? And I think that, like you said, everybody struggles with this. I don't think that it certainly is not just an empath problem. However, what I've noticed is that while certain people who seem to have a tougher skin can kind of let it roll off their back, like I remember as a kid actually noticing that there were kids where they'd get reprimanded and it was kind of like they'd flinch and then they'd just keep going. Whereas if I was reprimanded as a child, I would crumble. Like I would just be devastated by it. It would stop me in my tracks. And what I've come to realize is that people who have that extra level of sensitivity to what's going on outside of them and around, and in the sort of the emotional landscape of other people, often will also pick up on what I consider sort of like the will and the desire of other people, and can feel the urgency, can feel what the other person wants, and also can feel the disappointment when we don't deliver it. And so what I've noticed is that for people who are in that sort of more sensitive category, there often is a bit more of a sense of pressure to comply because we feel other people's disapproval, we feel other people's disappointment, and we also feel other people's like will and desire if they're trying to push us to do something. And so that can be sort of an added level of pressure to comply.
And that expectation, like you don't want to let someone down, because then you have to absorb that disapproval, that energy of whatever their frustration or whatever they're coming at you with. And I know that when we had our pre-interview talk, we wanted to have a discussion a little bit about how to recognize, like, is your child the sensitive, or, are you, and, maybe it's even a grandchild. Like, there's a lot of star seeds right now among us, and children that are brought
Yes.
in who are highly sensitive, highly aware, and some of us, and I'm going to say us, because as a collective, might not know how to respond to that child who crumbles, who can't take any criticism, or like, I'll see grandparents like judge and compare their grandchildren, and it can make those children feel so insignificant. But that's not the intention of the grandparent. They're just bragging, but they don't understand how it's coming across.
Right.
So yeah, let's talk
Right.
about,
Right.
to help our children, these wonderful children that have been placed here with, these rainbow souls. Like, how can we better understand them? I'm sure you have some connection with that. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So I guess, I mean, I think that we're sort of like, it feels to me like we're kind of almost like entering into like the third generation of sensitive people. I mean, we've always had sensitive people, but it feels like we're sort of exponentially more and more of us are being born sensitive. And we had sort of the indigo children that were kind of the previous generation. And now all of these kids that are coming through as star seeds and just really sensitive. And I was just thinking, like, the first piece of the question you asked is like, how do you even recognize your kid as sensitive? And I guess I would say, I think that most parents with sensitive children know that they have a highly sensitive child. And the thing is, I mean, if you've ever been like, oh my God, this child is so sensitive, chances are you have a kid who is picking up energy that is coming from outside of the world. What I've noticed is that with kids, that a lot of times they'll tend to manifest things I like to think in terms of the 4 elements of air, fire, water, and earth. And so, what I've noticed is that you've got some children who express their empathic distress through, I'll start with earth, through their bodies. And it's very common. I've seen this again and again, where you'll have kids who are highly sensitive, often very emotional, and it always is showing up in their digestive system. It's showing up with stomach aches. It's showing up with irritable bowel. It's showing up with, like urgency, and as well as food sensitivities and allergies. But stomach aches seem to be one of the things that I've witnessed with many of my friends with empath children, is that it can show up in a lot of digestive distress, because these kids don't really have the vocabulary or the ability to articulate. They don't necessarily know that they're picking stuff up from outside of themselves. And so their body is processing it in the only way it knows how, which is through physiological distress. So there are those kinds of kids, and in my experience, they tend to be very emotional. They tend to be very sensitive to other people's needs and things like that. But especially they tend to, it's like if something's stressful, it shows up in their body. Then there are the air empaths who are more inclined to perseverate. They're more likely to be very inclined to worry. They are probably precocious. They're probably children who they might be reading early, they may be speaking early, but they also are, just like kind of like they're the kind of child where you're like, you're only 7 years old. Why are you thinking about this major thing? Why are you worrying about this really big thing? You're a kid. And from their perspective, they're like, they came in worrying, thinking, seeing the greater picture. And also a lot of times that air empath, those kids will be like, this does not compute. What you're saying and what you're doing are two different, like what you're saying, what you're doing, and what's going on underneath the surface all don't add up. And like, you're saying one thing, but I know that there's other stuff going on. And so a lot of times, like with the air empaths, they're going to be very, like just very inclined to worry, very inclined to perseverate, very inclined to be concerned about things. Fire empaths tend to be more, fire is all about, so earth is body, air is thought, fire is action and movement. And so fire empaths are the kids who tend to act out a lot. They can be the ones who express, because there's a really interesting, I've been having some really good conversations with people about sort of the cross-pollination between ADHD and empaths, and how, and so you can have these kids who are extremely expressive, like very volatile, very emotional, very, very physical, very visceral, very hyperactive. They tend to be the ones who express their distress through temper tantrums, through acting out, but also they often tend to be a little bit more forceful in fighting for what they want. And what's fascinating is that, up to about the age of 8 or 9, and I'm speaking in fairly blanket statements here, so your mileage may vary, but up until about the age of 8 or 9, girls will be fire empaths. But because of the way we are socialized as females in our culture, a lot of times what happens with girls is that they start suppressing that fiery behavior, and they start, sort of complying with social pressure to be a people pleaser, to be a nice girl, and to sort of acquiesce. And often what happens is that those girls who had that fiery nature will shift towards more either the earth response, where it's all about what's going on in their body, or they will suddenly shift a lot of times more towards the water empath, which are the ones who I think most people think of an empath, think around the water category, which is the emotions. And so the water empath is the one who's feeling all the things, who's very, very emotional, like you were saying, like it can just crumble at the drop of a hat, crying very, very easily, prone to a lot of, night terrors and distress, and just very, very, very sensitive. Now, just like a zodiac chart or an astrological chart has all these elements in them, there's no such thing as like you're only this or you're only that. These are categories, and most of us have aspects of all of them, but a lot of times we tend to have a dominant or a couple dominant aspects. So like, for example, personally, I tend to be more inclined towards the water and, the water and air, with the body, with the earth kind of following that. And, whereas I would say fire is probably the least in my sort of my expression as an empath, whereas you could have somebody who's more of like a fire water empath or an earth water empath or something. So does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And it's relatable. I mean, it's just,
yeah.
It's just ways to see how it manifests. So my question is, you're talking about, would you use their dominant way they express their empathicness, their empathy? Would you use that to help them feel more understood? Like, would you give them situations that would help their earth, or would you bring in fire if they're mostly earth to help them run through it? Like, what do you suggest to help?
So I think it really depends. Yeah, because I think it really depends on the situation, like, for example, say you've got a fire empath who's like really all over the place and just like hyper and, just really like, throw them in the bathtub. Like put them in an Epsom salt soak. You've got somebody who's all in their head and all like thinking, take them for a walk, sit them on a big rock, have them feel their connection to the earth. And so, I think it depends on the extreme of what's going on, because sometimes, like, for another way to approach it is, say you've got somebody who's perseverating. One of the ways to work it through is to talk it out or write it out, like journaling. But if you've got somebody who's already in a state of a great deal of distress, sometimes using the element that represents what they sort of their dominant expression of distress can exacerbate it. So I will, I think part of it is like intuitively sensing, is doing this thing going to hurt this child or help this child? Like, what feels like the better approach? Is the antidote the opposite, or is the antidote like, sort of like the idea of a little bit of like helps settle the like, kind of like, do you lean into this, drive into the skid, or do you try to steer away from it?
That's a really cool answer, because it's dynamic and it adjusts, and there's not one set path. You have to just sort of feel it, and maybe even just going through it with the child, say, I hear you worrying. I hear you asking questions about every 5 minutes of your day.
Yes.
What's happening next, and what are the options, and what can you do? And that's, to me, that I'm going to segue back to the emotional freeing technique. I think that's the power in that technique, is that you're acknowledging exactly where you are, and you're seeing it. You're seeing yourself. Like, I completely love and accept myself, even though I'm worried about what gas prices are going to be next week, and it's stressing me out. Or, I'm not sure what my credit card bill is going to be this month because we've been spending a lot, but I completely love and accept myself. Like, if you can just get to what is bothering you, or like get to the air, talk about it, say, you have all these thoughts going on right now. And do you want me to go through the thoughts with you, or do you want to try to do something the opposite of thinking about it? You want to try to go for a run, or go up and down the stairs, or go down a slide, or, but it's not that you're trying to avoid or disregard. It's that you're like,
no,
you probably don't want to stay in this worry state because it's not comfortable, right? Just ask for permission. Ask this, because those children know, and then you teach them how to go through the problem solving, right? Because our whole goal is for everyone to be their own therapist. We want everyone to be empowered.
Yeah. Well, and, one of the things I was mentioning to you before we jumped on the camera that I've been really thinking a lot about is, the way we attach as human beings, and how, as babies, we do not have nervous systems that are capable of self-regulating. And so, when we're in utero and through our, into toddlerhood, into, sort of getting to a point where we start to have some autonomy, we also start to be able to self-regulate our nervous system only after we've kind of, developed some, grown some teeth and weaned from our mother. And so the thing is that we are reliant on our caregivers, and in most cases, this would be our mother, from conception all the way to being about somewhere around 2 years old. We are dependent. Our nervous system is basically what's called co-regulated with our moms or with whoever else is our caregiver. And so the other thing is that as parents or grandparents or guardians or fairy godmothers, in my case, or aunties, that as the people who are providing care for sensitive children, the other thing we need to be aware of is our own nervous system. And if this child is relying on us, because the thing is, if a child starts to wobble, they're going to seek the adult in their life who can help them to settle and to ground and to regulate their nervous system. And so one of the most important things that we can do as the adult in the situation is ground and center and self-regulate and calm our own nervous system down, and own if we're stressed, if we're anxious, if we're worried, recognizing that inside of ourselves and doing what we need to do to calm down our nervous system. And obviously, as you are a fan of EFT, I am as well. Wouldn't be a master trainer for EFT International if I wasn't. But that I do find that having a chance to, use tapping, using like even the simple technique of going through the EFT points and touch and breathe, where we just inhale calmness and peace and exhale worry and stress, that can be, that we can reboot our own system. And so as parents, it's not just, or as the guardians, it's not just about giving them choices and helping them to learn how to start to navigate their way through this. I also believe it's about us really knowing our own energy system and shifting it. And I'll give you an example of kind of the opposite. Many, many, many years ago, I was around a mom and they're fairly young, I would say, like just coming out of infancy into baby, but we're probably talking like 3-4 month old baby, was very colicky. And the mother was holding the baby in her arms, and she is just like, and the baby has gas. And so she's just tapping the baby on the back and like, but very rapidly, like staccato. It's okay, baby. It's okay, baby. It's okay, baby. It's okay. And like just watching this mother, I was having an anxiety attack. Like it was so stressful to see the way this mother was trying to soothe this baby. And I was like, no wonder this baby is screaming louder and louder and louder, because the baby was not calm and the mother was not calm. And as a result, they were like, it became like a feedback loop where each person's stress was reinforcing the other person's stress. Whereas we used to call my mom the baby whisperer. My mother has not ever met a baby she didn't fall in love with. And my mom was just like, she would have, and I feel like I learned this from my mother. My mother had this ability to just kind of like drop down and go into this state of just incredible calmness. And so if a baby was stressed out and somebody handed her to my mother or him to my mother, that baby would just go, like they'd chill out, because my mom knew how to calm down her nervous system, especially when she was like young in her early, in her 20s with me. I think she had a little bit more stress, but by the time, especially like the grandsons showed up, you could just see her be like, okay. And she could just drop into the state of ease and calmness and help the baby to come into that state as well.
That is a beautiful, beautiful sentiment and just example, because when you see the opposite of the not grounded, not calming, I've seen that. There's just like, you're not supposed to shake your baby, but if you're like hitting them on the back of their, their torso that hard, it's almost like shaking baby. And it's just, I have seen that before.
Yeah.
And
I mean, being around a colicky baby is awful. I mean, I am very lucky in that I've not ever had a colicky baby of my own, but I've been around and have been the caretaker for colicky babies at times. And I will say it wears you thin after 2 or 3 days of somebody screaming in your ear. It's, it is not easy. And so I think it really does become kind of this intense kind of tape loop of like, and this is where, it takes a village, because, this is where what the mom needs or the caretaker needs is like a moment to like go and take a shower, go and take a nap, like somebody else to say, I'm going to take the baby now, you go deal. Like, and I think that this is something like in our culture that we really need to be thinking about around, with people with kids. It's like, what can we do to help them? What can we do to help make this a place where parenting is not like a solo venture?
Right. It's not just reserved for the person, the ultimate mom. The moms who are just really good at it. Like they've been a good mother in like 5 different lifetimes or something. And you can tell those parents, they just glide along. But that, everyone, our kids teach us so much. So I remember when my little guys were so young, and I got into yoga, and I had the realization I was only there for the ending, the shavasana. Like, I would go through the whole thing just for that 10 minutes to lay completely still and not listen to anything but like grounding, soothing music. That's how I got into yoga. I was like, I'm all for the shavasana. It's just like,
Yeah.
Please come watch my kids for an hour and a half so I can get some shavasana.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and it's so funny how even with that, it's like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could just cut to the chase and just give ourselves permission to take an hour and a half for the shavasana and not have to earn it by doing all the yoga postures beforehand?
Now I would just find a quiet corner and just tell the instructor, hey, I'm just here for the shavasana, and I just lay there. That's what I would do now in my second self, my second time around.
Yeah.
I'm just here for the dark room and the quiet.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So listeners out there, if you have a sensitive child around you, the major message is to find your shavasana, find your grounding, because what you're putting out there is going to help that child, whatever they need, and it's going to bring you the clarity to know how to respond. So find out ways to ground yourself, grounding meditations. There's so many resources. And Jennifer, can you tell us about your website or resources you recommend to the beginner who's interested in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do I have 30 seconds to say one thing?
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I want to say is, in addition to knowing how to ground ourselves, the other thing is we can handle other people's stress way better when we've dealt with our own. And a lot of times it makes it way harder to deal with things if we have unhealed wounds and triggers inside of us. And so as a parent, or a caregiver, guardian of a child, if you're noticing that you're getting stirred up, if you're noticing that you're getting triggered, if you're noticing that stuff is happening, this is an invitation to do the healing work. Mm-hmm. This is an invitation to address it. And so if you are finding it next to impossible to self-regulate and to be calm and grounded, chances are there is some stuff underneath the surface, like we got some stuff under the hood that needs to be addressed. But what I can say is, in my personal experience, it is 100 times easier to sit with another person's discomfort when you have dealt with your own. Like, once I learned to sit with my own discomfort and my own despair, I could sit with other people's stuff way more effectively than before when I was avoiding mine. So I just wanted to say that as sort of a last comment, because I think that really is an important piece of the message too. So my website is empathicmastery.com, but I have kind of a system. If you're interested in reading my book, you go to empathicmasterybook.com. And if you're interested in checking out my podcast, which is all about being highly sensitive and empathic and all the different ways it affects and impacts all kinds of aspects of our life, that is the Empathic Mastery Show. And so that's empathicmasteryshow.com. If you go to empathicmastery.com, it will lead you to those other things as well. But if you're looking for one of those two things, very simple, empathicmastery.com, empathicmasterybook.com, empathicmasteryshow.com.
Yeah, and I'll put that in the show notes, those two resources. And
awesome.
Yes, thank you. Oh, it's just such a pleasure learning, and
thank you, Julie,
and growing. And I know that there's many kids and even adults who can relate to this, that this is going to help. So share, if this is resonating with anybody, share it and like it, because the more we can educate and understand what we're all going through, the better world we can make. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And if people are interested in learning more about EFT, you can find some tutorials and information about how to use it. And it's the wonderful thing about it is that it is a self-help technique. It is something that you can do for yourself. So that's also, if you jump over to empathicmastery.com, you can find information about that there too. Julie, thank you so much for having me today. Yeah.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Jennifer. And thank you, Archangel Michael, for being here with us. And all the angels. We had a group with us today. Yes.
All the angels. We did. We had quite the crew.
Well, all the best, and we'll speak soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. As always, you can go to my website and make any comments, suggestions, just share anything that's on your heart about any of the episodes. If you visit www.youneedapeptalk.com, you can find every episode and feel free to share. Your subscription to my podcast really matters, so if you can subscribe, share, go to Apple and rate my podcast, that really helps my listenership and gets my message out to as many people as possible. So I do appreciate that. And as always, enjoy each day, as each moment is a chance to create the life of your dreams. Take care.